So that's one thing. That's the customer side of it. The other side of it has to do with the generational shift in the employee base. Although I hate to admit it, I'm an old boomer now. I'm getting pretty long in the tooth, and my generation is just going away. That's all there is to it. And what happened was COVID, and in the earlier part of this decade, caused boomers to decide, it's good enough. I'm ready to retire now. So they did. They left. The problem is the new generation of eligible employees for retail stores has a vastly different set of expectations than boomers and even Gen Xers did. For example, they take this online forever on technology as a birthright. It's not something extraordinary. It's something they expect, like wearing a pair of shoes. And so when they go to talk to a prospective employer, they want the same kind of technologies available to them in the job that they have in their life. So when you look at those two behaviors, when you look at the way consumers are using information and technology, and when you see the way that young employees in particular expect information and technology, you have a volatile mix for retailers. Because in fact, the stores, to a great extent, still largely mimic what we did in the 20th century. We're in the 21st century now, so things have really changed. And that's changing fundamentally how employees work in the store and how consumers shop in the store.
Welcome to Storefront Science, the show where we decode the chaos of modern store operations.
We're bypassing the buzzwords to have honest conversations with the practitioners and executives who are actually shaping the industry. All right, welcome into another episode of the Storefront Science Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Whitfield, and with me is my co-host, Ben Hinshaw. Joining us today is Brian Kilcourse, co-founder and managing partner at RSR. Recently, our company and RSR combined to do a report called The State of the Retail Workforce. So excited to have you here, Brian, today, joining us to talk about the report and everything going on in retail.
Very pleased to be here. Thank you for asking.
So, Brian, you've been in the industry since the early 1970s, and at RSR, you guys are benchmarking the workforce attitudes for the past 18 years, leading up to the report that we did. In the summary, you guys are like blatantly saying retail for the workforce model is broken, noticing that nearly 75% of store associates feel overworked and underpaid. Can you kind of just walk us through a little bit of that evolution and why the old churn and burn model is not what it used to be, or how things are changing?
Well, it's a long story, but the net of it is that consumers expect so much more in the store than they might have even in the past. And that's the product of some fundamental behavioral changes that really started in the 2007 timeframe with the introduction of the iPhone, interestingly enough. It's hard to remember now, but in 2007, which was, almost 20, how many years ago now? 20 years ago. It was 1 year before the Great Recession. And what consumers suddenly had to do with the recession is they had to find the best bargains and make their money go as far as it possibly could, because of course they were short of it. So they started to use the iPhone, and the utilization of retail websites went from, perhaps 10% of sales up to something like 40, 50, 60% of sales, even when those purchases ended up being completed in the store. This was such a fundamental behavioral change to the way we all shop that we all now take it for granted. But if you think of your own shopping experience, Ryan or Ben, think of what you use your phone for. You'll probably start investigating the products. You might compare prices to what's on at Amazon or over at Walmart. You might know how much they have in stock, and you might even know which aisle it's in. So when you go to the store now, you're pretty loaded. You have a ton of information at your fingertips, and that has fundamentally changed how consumers use the store. What is also happening is consumers, of course, the other thing they don't have enough of besides money is they don't have enough time. So when they do all that pre-work to get into the store, the last thing you need is one of two things: either the store not having accurate information about what you want to buy, or a store employee who has no idea what you're talking about. And so what's happened is that consumers have become remarkably impatient with store employees, and either they want the help or they want them to get out of the way. And employees regard this as being rude, rude and impatient. And we've all had experiences like this, right? You can think of your own last trip to a big box store and think of how unhelpful people can be sometimes. So that's one thing. That's the customer side of it. The other side of it has to do with the generational shift in the employee base. Although I hate to admit it, I'm an old boomer now. I'm getting pretty long in the tooth, and my generation is just going away. That's all there is to it. And what happened was COVID, and in the earlier part of this decade, caused boomers to decide, it's good enough. I'm ready to retire now. So they did. They left. The problem is the new generation of eligible employees for retail stores has a vastly different set of expectations than boomers and even Gen Xers did. For example, they take this online forever on technology as a birthright. It's not something extraordinary. It's something they expect, like wearing a pair of shoes. And so when they go to talk to a prospective employer, they want the same kind of technologies available to them in the job that they have in their life. So when you look at those two behaviors, when you look at the way consumers are using information and technology, and when you see the way that young employees in particular expect information and technology, you have a volatile mix for retailers. Because in fact, the stores, to a great extent, still largely mimic what we did in the 20th century. We're in the 21st century now, so things have really changed. And that's changing fundamentally how employees work in the store and how consumers shop in the store.
So I want to follow up on that. I'd wanted to kind of talk about specifically the idea of like this browsing delusion, where
Right.
stores still operate with the understanding um, of shoppers wanting to be able to browse, and most shoppers don't actually want to be able to browse. So, but I want to take that kind of more of like a macro level question
Right.
for you, and say, with those things you just highlighted, that both employees and customers want, why, in your experience or opinion, are retail operations struggling to catch up with what those demands are right now?
Well, first of all, let's deal with this delusion. Retailers are very proud of their stores. You're very proud of your company. I'm very proud of my company. I'm a musician and I record music, and I'm very proud of my music. Unfortunately, the wide world doesn't agree with me. So it's all a perception. We love what we love, right?
Yeah.
And retailers they really are proud of their stores. They love them. And their investments are heavily oriented towards the landed experience, the physical experience. And that's been that way for a long time. So we have to give them a little bit of a pass for that. However, when you look at the way consumers are shopping, they're not so in love with the store. As a matter of fact, they view the store as part of a total shopping experience. We just discussed that. It's equal parts digital and physical. And so if they see an inconsistency with what's happening in the digital space versus what's happening in the physical state, they are remarkably unforgiving. So there's that dynamic at play. It's really working hard. What most people on the outside of retail don't understand, however, is the margins that retailers are working with. So the way I describe this is I'll take a dollar bill. You can take any currency, and you look at that dollar bill and you think, I'm going to put that in the register. And 70 cents on that dollar is going to go towards the inventory. Another 20 to 25 cents is going to go to pay for running the business. It's all you have. And then at the end of the long day, after you pay your taxes, you might have a penny or two left to give back to the stockholders. Think what that means in terms of expenditures in the store. So if you have a 22% SG&A ratio, and the vast majority of that is tied up in the store, adding a single percentage point of sales to that number is lethal to retailers. They just don't have much to work with. So retailers appear to be very risk averse and investment averse, when in fact the real issue is they just don't have very much money. Now, when you think about something as simple as, let's pick something really easy. Let's pick a register printer, a receipt printer. And let's imagine you're a store chain with 1,000 stores, and each store has 10 registers. How many How many printers is that? I can't do the math real fast, but you get the gist of it. And if it's $500 a pop, you're suddenly talking about $1 million for a lousy receipt printer, one little tiny technology. So when you're talking about big and sophisticated technology, suddenly these small decisions get really big really fast. And that's why retailers have a hard time keeping up with the rapid rate of change in consumer level technologies, which are quite advanced. You think about what you and your life have, it's better than you're going to experience in most stores. So that's the issue right there.
No, that makes total sense. I think there's a lot of change in terms of the experience people are having in the stores, how they're
Yeah,
interacting with expertise level. They're coming in with, like you said, a lot more information and a lot more knowledge. And those, if they're met at the store without, like, let's say you go to whether at Home Depot or Sephora or Best Buy, where there's supposed to be expert level people in the store, and those people aren't there because they're not staffed or they just weren't prepared for this level of rush. Like that level of experience that the shopper is going to have is not quite going to be up to par with what they're expecting. And they're going to kind of, what's the risk for that retailer in terms of losing sales there, kind of the shopper for not kind of coming back to that location. Can you speak to that at all?
sure. Well, let's remember that we always have these big bugaboos in the background. Every retailer in the world has Amazon as a benchmark,
Mhm.
Walmart as a benchmark, some other large retailer, might be the Home Depot. If you're an Ace or a True Value hardware customer, you can always get at those places what you can't get at the local retailer. And consumers know that. And I think, again, think of your own experience. I think of mine. I routinely have my phone with me when I'm standing in a store like a Target, for example, and I'm comparing prices on Amazon. I'm standing in front of the merchandise.
Yeah.
It must drive the guys at Target crazy. But we all have that power of information at our fingertips, and we literally have the entire world as our assortment. So we can shop anywhere. And if we just have a little bit of patience, if we're willing to wait a day or two for a shipment, we have many, many choices. So again, that ties back to what we were saying at the very beginning about consumers having a lot of impatience. Retailers really struggle with that. Let's call it the commoditization of the value proposition. Well, think about a grocer, for example. How differentiating is milk and eggs? Can you think of a reason why you'd shop at one grocer versus another for your milk and eggs? I really can't.
Yeah.
You might say, "Oh, that's organic," and that's not organic, or "I like the box," or whatever. You don't have any reasons to shop at one or another. Retailers know that, the commoditization of the product, and so what they do is they try to improve services in a differentiating way, and there's some localization of the inventory in an interesting way as well. And those two things both, of course, tie back to the operational model. Retailers who are winners, and particularly those who are SMB retailers, understand that what's going to differentiate them from the big guys is not going to be availability and price, because Amazon, Walmart, Home Depot, those companies, they've nailed that. They've got it down. What they're going to differentiate on is service, and knowledgeable service is a real key.
Yeah. So following up on that, I know for me, and I'll throw my age out as well, that I'm an elder millennial. So uh, I feel like I'm kind of halfway between these generational gaps of like if I'm just shopping, I like the in-store experience, but if I'm picking up, you know, uh, toiletries, like that's going to either be an Amazon order or it's going to be a store pickup order. That's not something that I'm not looking to go shop toothpaste, right? I know
Right.
what I like. I want it ordered, want it delivered, all that. So, like I think generationally there's some differences. I think that, there are people like me who I think depending on what I'm buying, I'm looking for a different experience. Um, and so, like you said, improving the experience for the customer is a big part of the solution for retailers. And on our side as a vendor at Logile, we talk about empowering the workforce, like a lot of people
Right.
try to talk about, and that's a big talking point, right? Like making the workforce enabled to do their job better and improve the customer experience. Um, in your experience, and again, your opinion, what is the pathway for these for retailers to improve that in-store experience that suits, a variety of customer needs right now?
The first one is the hardest one. It's to get past a mindset as it relates to labor in the store. Labor in the store is the second biggest expense retailers undertake after cost of goods, right? If you just look at a standard P&L, labor is going to be the next big number. And retailers have always thought of labor in the stores as a controllable cost, not as an opportunity. Now, that sounds like, Pollyanna and hyperbole. But in fact, if these people in the store floor are the representation of your brand and you're squeezing them on pay and on vacation, on healthcare, on technology that they're using in the store, what kind of brand ambassador do you think they're going to be? Not much of one, right? They're worried about when they're going to get their next break. Um, so, so, the hardest thing that has to happen is a shift in attitude from thinking of it as a controllable cost to thinking of it as an enablement of an opportunity and enabling your people to differentiate your brand in a positive way in the eyes of the consumer. So that's the biggest one. The next one, some of these things sound so mundane, you would think of them as kind of silly, and yet we know it's true. The next one is you better have reliable high Wi-Fi in your store for both your employees and your customers. No more wrapping your store in tinfoil. That's out the window. If you're running stores in faraway places like Fargo, North Dakota, you'd better make sure you have Wi-Fi. And there are technologies that will help you to do that. Another one is to enable just-in-time information to the person at the point of need. We think of this in the context of getting the right data and the right business rules to the right person at the moment of decisioning. Now, in the retail setting, that's hopefully why you're helping a customer, not after the customer's walked out the door in frustration, right? So get the right business rules, the right data to the right person at the right moment in time. And now that sounds, again, a bit like hyperbole, but what we're really talking about fundamentally is real-time cloud-enabled applications. That's what we're talking about, with the data at its foundation as opposed to with function as its foundation. There are a lot of other things I could associate with that. One of them is, for example, because a lot of the people who are working in your stores accept the Apple interface or a Droid interface as their standard, it ought to look like that, don't you think? It ought to look just like the stuff they use in their life. And for that reason, one of the things we point out is have one app to rule them all. One app that the employee uses to be able to access all the capabilities that they need in order to complete their task, whether it's replenishing a shelf or looking up a customer order or messaging the manager because you need some special permissions or something like that. So one app to rule them all. And the reason for that is because in spite of your best intentions, you're probably not going to train your employees on everything. So it ought to look like what they're used to so they can at least get started. And finally, and this one gets missed, and then we can turn it over for a conversation, is the ability to ping your peers when you have a problem. So I have somebody who's, for example, maybe I'm in the tool aisle at the Home Depot, but I'm from the plumbing department. And some customer asked me how to use this tool. I have no clue. I'm a plumbing guy. So I want to ping somebody really quickly, either to get the right answer or to get that person over there to help the customer, something along those lines.
That makes total sense. And it's all about kind of enabling those frontline retailers to do their job properly and giving them the tools and not overcomplicating it, because we know how many times they can have 16 different tools, all very specialized to do one specific thing. And then you spend your entire day trying to learn what you're supposed to be doing, learn the new interface, learn how to use it. And ultimately the how it is received by both the store employees and then also the people working in the store is just kind of discombobulated and slower than they'd like. And that kind of hurts the experience for everybody involved.
I remember when I was a CIO, we had a big new project for the stores, and it had to do with inventory management and just managing the store essentially. Big, big, big ERP. And this might seem like small dollars in today's context, but back in the 1990s, it was a lot of money. It was $50 million. Okay, at the time that was a big deal. And when I produced the budget, I said we need to double that. We need to double that because we have to bring all the organizational development people into the store to teach them how to use the app, to teach them how to use the technology, all the rest of it. My boss, the CEO, said, no, we're not going to do that. Either they're going to learn the technology or they're going to lose their job. That kind of a lousy attitude, right? Guess what? The project ended up costing about $120 million. And over the course of many years, because we ended up having to do all the organizational development, plus we had to clean up the mess we had made by not doing it in the first place. So this is the kind of problem that the new technology allows retailers to overcome. They can actually make it look a lot like the stuff that we use in our daily lives. When you're going back to the iPhone for just an example, you fully expect to be able to take something from one app and just copy it over into the other one, and it actually works. You never think about how much technology went into that. But in fact, it's pretty remarkable. Say by 1990 standards, by 2026 standards is passé. So it's become part of the cost of living in this modern world. Retailers have got to make that easy to use, and they can because the technologies are really good, and they really do exist.
That makes sense. So there's one thing I did want to note from the report, that the real winners today, they don't obsess over some other things that are really happening in the workforce. They're not obsessing over shrink or turnover, but really focusing on net promoter score and sales per employee. Can you explain why that specific philosophy is working so well for them?
This gets to a big thing. It's not to say that turnover and shrink aren't important. They are. They certainly are. Remember back to what I said about the store P&L. When you think about how brutal that P&L is, leaving money on the table is never a good idea. So shrink is essentially money that's left on the table. It's money that could be redirected towards, say, for example, customer service function. And turnover is, of course, very important. Depending whether you're talking about inventory turnover or employee turnover, they're both expensive. So you want to be able to deal with those issues. So it's not to say that winners don't care about that. But what they focus on is measures that measure, first of all, whether your customers are getting the satisfaction that they're looking for. That's the NPR score. And the other one is sales per employee, which is kind of the same thing, but through the lens of the employee's performance in the store. And if they pay attention to those things, they'll get those other things. They'll get the other performance they're looking for.
Makes sense. So we like to kind of end with an option for 2 closing questions.
Okay.
And I'm going to give you an example from my past of kind of how you can answer these. Go as big as you want or as granular as you want. So my dad worked at Domino's for 33 years. And when they asked him what kept them up at night, it wasn't corporate strategy. It was something as simple as the price of cheese. So feel free to go as big as you want or as granular as you want with these answers. So option A is, when you look at the retail landscape right now, what is one risk factor that keeps you up at night? Like you think that is the most important thing. Or option B, if you were handed a magic wand to fix one broken dynamic in the industry, what is your first thought and what would you fix with it? So you can go with both of them or just choose one. It's up to you.
What keeps me up at night? I'll answer that one quickly, and then we'll get to the other one, which is I could wax on forever about what always kept me up at night. Now, remember, I was a CIO for a lot of years, so I have that perspective, was that and I think about this in the context of AI and things like robo-taxis and stuff like that. Code is written by humans. Humans make mistakes. Sometimes those mistakes are really big ones. And so what used to keep me up at night was whether or not we were informing these technology enablements with the quality that they required. That was what I obsessed over that. That was a big deal. And we could talk on about that, but that gets into the role of the CIO and whether or not that person is important or superfluous. We'll put that aside. If I could wave my magic wand, it goes back to what I was saying about the power of the employee as your brand ambassador. I go back to, there was a guy named Peter Drucker in the 1950s. In those days, he was regarded as the father of modern management. Interestingly enough, what a concept, right? Anyway, my dad was a supply chain guy, and when I first got a job as a manager, he gave me this book by Peter Drucker. It was actually not a book; it was a paper. It was called The Theory of Business, and he said that there were three constituents that every business had to serve. First of all, was the customers. That was the primary constituency. And then the second was the employee as that business's most important assets. And the third one were the owners. Now, Drucker's contention was that if you gave the customer, if you found and maintained your customer base, kept them motivated and happy and coming back to your brand, that you would make plenty of money and the owners would be satisfied. They'd get rich. Good for them. And the employee is that interface between the products you sold and the people who bought them. They, not the inventory, not your stores, not the technology, but your employees were the most important asset. If you kept that in mind, again, the owners would make a lot of money. But his contention was that if you focused on the employee to the expense of either your customer or your employees, you would fail. If I could change any dynamic on this planet, it would be our obsession with owners and the value of their investment. They get rich. They don't need to worry. They're going to get plenty of money. I would focus on both, what are we doing for our customers? Are we a destination? When they think of us, do they think of our store? For example, my Home Depot or my Walmart or my CVS or my Canadian Tire? Or are they thinking about something else? And then secondarily, I would want to make the retail job a meaningful and fulfilling one, where somebody actually wanted to live a life in the retail sector. It's a tough business. I love retail. I've been in it forever. And one of the things I love about retail is people don't buy things they don't want. You're fundamentally in the business of giving people what they want. Why is this so hard? And one of the problems is we don't incentivize employees to think of the business in that way. And I wish we could change that. Now, the owners, as I said, they're going to get plenty rich. A lot of volume that flows through those doors. No, they get to keep a penny or two of it. Good for them. And I don't think they should worry too much about their future.
No, I love that answer. I think that the people truly do matter inside the stores so much. I think that that's something we keep going back to in this podcast and in other ones we've done is like the store is the face of your brand and the people inside of it are the face of that store. And so it really is all about the employees and making sure that their experience is the best. And then everything else will kind of flow down from there perfectly. So,
just to put a cap on that, I know we're wrapping up here, but in RSR, when we advise retailers, one of the things we ask them is, what is your brand value? What do you think your brand really delivers? And again, going back to retailers and their stores, they're very proud of their brand. And they think they deliver, in many cases, a lot more than they actually do. So one of the things is be brutally honest with yourself. What unique differentiating value are you delivering that your competitor couldn't also deliver? If you say price and convenience, I'm going to say you're going to be out of business, buddy. Because Amazon can beat you anytime they want. Walmart can beat you up anytime they want. They're the masters of price and convenience. If you say what differentiates me is my service, then invest in your service. And it's a human industry. It's nothing else. So we want people to have a great experience, and that's dependent on how our employees feel about our brand, because they are our representatives.
Yep. I would say on my end, not been in the industry as long as you, Brian, but I throughout college, I won't name names, but I did work at 3 different retailers during my college years. And at 2 of those, we had a lot of downtime. We did not focus on service and did not focus on the customer experience. I mean, the customer experience, but also the employee experience.
Yeah.
And at both of those, I'll candidly say I was very miserable. The one that I was at the longest was the one that is, again, without naming names, they are well known for their customer service and their employee treatment. And that place didn't matter if it was a couple days after holiday here in the States, we were still busy because that store was always busy, and it was
Hmm.
because of the experience I think that we offered. So, um, yeah, I think we're all aligned. I think that's a big part of the point of this show and the point of what we do on a day-to-day basis is trying to help retailers um, find that way to create better customer and employee experiences. Because to your point, that's what our job is to give people what they want and to serve them. So
Yeah, I think I love the retail industry. I fell in love with it a long time ago. My very first job was a college job, just probably like you two guys.
yeah,
It's where I happened to meet my wife many, many moons ago, and but she was one of the reasons that I like working at that place. Um, we had a great store manager, and she taught us at the time that um, it happened to be a high-end women's clothing store, and she said women don't walk into that store to look awful when they walk out. They want to look great. Help
yeah,
them look great. That what could be better? What better proposition is that? I worked for 20 years at a chain drugstore, and people didn't go into the store. Well, let's think that one through. We hoped that they didn't go into the store because they were sick and miserable. They wanted to live a better life. They wanted to feel better in their daily lives if they had some sort of condition they were dealing with. They wanted to feel better because they were taking the right meds. If they were buying a birthday card for their kids, they wanted to be able to find it. They wanted to live a better life. And so we were in the business of helping them live a better life. I like that. I like that a lot. You
yeah,
know, we talked about Home Depot. People don't go to the Home Depot because they need a variable speed drill. They go to the Home Depot because they need to drill a hole. So help them drill a hole. It's retail is a fun business. We don't have to make it such a miserable experience for the employees because they are our brand ambassadors.
absolutely. Well, want to thank you for taking some time today
Yeah.
to want to do this and share all that level expertise. Want to remind listeners that both Logile and RSR, uh, like we said earlier, did come together to put together the State of the Retail Workforce report. I'll link it here in the show below. While you're here, make sure to like and subscribe and follow us for more content. Brian, really appreciate the time today.
It was a real pleasure. Fun to talk to you guys. And let's do it again sometime. All right. We
Absolutely,
will.
we'll have you back on.
All right.